everyone, and welcome to Guiding One, Learning Outcome One. Recognize what we believe about children affects our interactions with them. And I chose this slide background on purpose because it gives a sense of perspective, and I think that's what it's all about when we think about the choices we make for guiding children, is that it's about perspective, and we're going to learn a little bit more about that as we go through these slides. These key points come from your textbook, Guiding Young Children, and the pages are indicated there from the 9th edition. If you have an earlier edition, you can find the page numbers on my daily guide that's in the Learn shell for day one. When it comes to considering what shapes your guidance approach with children, the authors of your text suggest there are 3 things that come into play. The first are your values, and these are broad and somewhat general ideas about what is good or desirable, and it's somewhat influenced by society. The second is your knowledge of child development, and because of course what you know about child development will impact your choices. Your choices and expectations of what a toddler will do would be much different than what you would expect a school ager to do. And that all comes back to your knowledge of what's kind of going on with typical child development. And the third is your personal beliefs. And these are related to values, but are much more specific and personal than them. And they're very much influenced by your culture and your family upbringing. And so these 3 things kind of all come into play and impact the choices and strategies that you use with children. The authors go on to suggest that adults who work with young children typically want them to learn these 3 categories of things. The first is self-direction, being able to take charge of their own behavior, and more importantly, to do the right thing when no one is watching. Sometimes we adults need to still work on self-direction a little bit better. However, in order to achieve this with children, adults must gradually relinquish more and more control and responsibility to children, and this would take time to develop, and lots of techniques involved there. The second thing that we want children to learn is to develop relationships. We want them to care about and be able to get along with other people. That's just a good lifelong skill that you're going to need. Some of my best working relationships have been with people who have been involved in some kind of a team, and that I always think that when you've been involved with a team, you just get to know how to learn how to work with different kinds of people. And this you could start with children right from a very young age. The author suggests it's your responsibility to help children to do so. And the third is self-actualization. There's actually a theorist, his name is Maslow, who developed kind of a pyramid, and at the very top is self-actualization. It's like a state of becoming the best possible you could be. And not many people have actually reached that. Some would say Mother Teresa might have been someone who was completely self-actualized. Maybe someone like Nelson Mandela would be another. But it does not mean that we should not strive to this state of self-actualization. And the authors define it as achieving satisfaction through work and making productive contributions. And I like this part as well, where it suggests that we assist children to find meaning and fulfillment in using their potential to their fullest, which really means that you're allowing them to be capable and giving them a sense of purpose. Two main underlying principles to the approach to guidance brought forward in this text are developmental perspective and looking at guidance from a positive and strength-based position. When it comes to the developmental perspective, observation is the key factor. And it's through careful observation and reflection that you really learn what would be the best approach with individual children and groups of children. When it comes to developmentally appropriate planning, there's three factors, and it's what we know about children in general. So we start with knowledge of child development from a typical perspective, and then we move into the next stage, which is what we know about children specifically. Because children don't all develop at the same rate, at the same pace. Some children may be advanced, some children may have challenges, and so that's why we begin with the general and the somewhat typical development, but it's through observation that you really learn what will affect children specifically because you really get to know them as individuals. And then the third factor there from the developmental perspective is to think about what we know about the beliefs, values, and customs of the children in your care, their families, their communities, their culture, and because without that knowledge and building relationships, it will probably end up with at some point a conflict or a difference in opinion with values. And so it's only in really knowing that kind of smooth and the beneficial choices can be made for the child. On the other side, with the positive and strength based, I chose an image here of this gentleman. His name is Howard Gardner, and he developed a theory about multiple intelligences. And he's one of my favorite theorists, and probably one of my favorites also who still happens to be alive. A lot of the theorists that we look at are actually, no, they're dead. Yep, they're dead. This guy, still alive. That's awesome. Um, in terms of multiple intelligences, he was the one who said that it's not about how smart you are, but rather how are you smart. And I love that when we look at children because it kind of comes back um, to not expecting children to all be the same. That we can we can try to find what is their special thing, what's the special thing for each of those children, and that will help us to look um, at them in a positive light and from a strength-based perspective. We want to be careful not to fall into the trap of making a big deal over an episode of negative behavior while kind of overlooking many positive exchanges. And this can easily happen in a busy day in a childcare setting that you I tend to refer to the challenging behavior child as little Johnny, and little Johnny's in an having an issue with another child, and we sometimes would automatically assume that little Johnny was the one who instigated the issue when maybe he did or maybe he didn't. But at the same time, we tend to focus on the negative behaviors of little Johnny without realizing that there are many moments in the day when he has humor, or maybe he's physically talented, or other positive aspects. And so we need to kind of switch our perspective and try to look at things in a more positive light. Finally, a positive approach treats children with respect and dignity. It does not shame, humiliate, ridicule, nor is it punitive, impatient, mean, or bossy. So if any of you in your centers or in your work with children are still using a time out place for children, then you probably want to stop doing that and find other ways of dealing with challenging behaviors. You're going to have 3 courses in guidance. You'll have lots of chances to learn more about how to deal with those challenging moments. Here are 2 recommendations for how you could develop a positive based approach. The first is to set reasonable limits, and that if the limits are not being met by the children, that you may choose to redirect them. And certainly you do want to role model the appropriate behaviors yourself. If children are not allowed to sit on the table, then you should not be sitting on the table. The example given in your textbook is where a child has kicked Jamal, and probably it was little Johnny. Maybe not. I don't want to be negative about little Johnny. However, a child kicks Jamal, and the ECE goes and says, kick the ball, not Jamal. This direction tells the child what they can do, and what they can do is right up front, so that we wouldn't say stop kicking, where we don't necessarily want to stop the behavior the child's doing. We want to tell them where they can do it in an appropriate way. And so it's a more positive way of wording the direction and telling the child what they can do right up front. The second is to identify the owner of the problem. And this is a technique that actually is pretty effective at any time you have a conflict with another adult in your own life or with the children that you're caring for. But we need to realize if children's behaviors are bothering the adults, but if the behaviors are actually very natural to childhood, then who owns that problem? If children are behaving in a noisy way, and I'm not saying noisy way and that they're being aggressive with each other and maybe fighting, not that kind of a noise, but if they're engaged in productive play and they're just enthusiastic and joyful in their play and the noise level kind of gets very high, we need to kind of notice if it's not bothering the children, then who owns the problem? When does noise become a problem? And the same thing can be said for very active play for children. And if we think about the value situation, Melinda tells a story about how we don't expect children who are very quiet and like to sit reading a book very much of their choices of the day. We don't go to them and say, "Hey, get up and start running around. It's better for your health. Come on, let's get run over here." We don't often make them start moving around quickly because it's good for their health. And yet the children who are very active in our care, we often try to get them to settle down, be still, sit down, take it easy. And so you just need to really remind yourself as to who owns the problem and redirect it if necessary, or find another acceptable way for the children to do those things that really are spontaneous and joyful and something that they're inspired to do. Um, to bring it home for you, I want you to remember something you did as a child that bothered adults around you and how you felt when they tried to squelch you or stop you from doing those behaviors. My personal example would be I used to sing at the table when it was time to eat supper. And my mother, I think it bothered my dad. And my mother would say, "Stop singing at the table." And so I would stop. But then the music would come out of me in another way. I would start whistling the song without even realizing that I was whistling, and then I would get in trouble for whistling. So I would stop whistling. And then next thing you know, I would be humming the song. And I was not doing these behaviors to annoy the adults at the table. I was doing it because the music was coming out of me and it was joyful for me. And so I just want you to try to remember something like that and think about who owns the problem. And maybe that will help you make your choices in terms of how to guide them. When you think about, oh, gee, I've been working in childcare for a few years and this guiding stuff is still challenging. It was challenging for me. I didn't get the chance to practice guiding skills. My educational background was a physical education degree. And when I started working with children, I had the knowledge of child development, but I didn't have the practice. So it took me a long time to kind of get better at guiding techniques and strategies. And I was young. You'll often hear me say when I'm teaching my young and dumb years. However, three things that you can do to help you develop your skills. Participate. Don't shy away. Get involved. Be there. Be involved with the children and support your team of coworkers. I like to recommend people observe someone who's really good at guiding children because when it looks good and it looks easy, it's not happening by accident. They're doing things because they're thinking about the best choices and probably making very good choices, and that's why it seems so easy for them. And it's not just an accident. Probably they're using good observation skills, which is the second point. Observation is not just watching; it's thinking critically about what it is you're seeing. So when you see children either doing something challenging, you should be asking why are they doing that? If they're going along with someone else very easily, you should ask yourself again, why are they doing that? Look for patterns in behaviors, especially challenging behaviors. Our children may be misbehaving when they're hungry, when they're tired. If they had a change in their living arrangement, we don't know what's going on at home sometimes that might be affecting their behavior. Be objective. Objective is something you'll learn more about in the academic communication course with Brian. But in terms of this course, you need to think factually. Don't make assumptions about why children are behaving in certain ways. We certainly have to make our best guesses, but don't just paint the entire child with one thought about why they're behaving in a certain way. You really do need to look for patterns, think about facts, take notes, mark down the day, the time things are happening, and all of this will help you to contemplate carefully in terms of your strategies and choices. And the final point is the learning cycle. The learning cycle for you involves increasing your initial awareness. This course is going to help you do that. It's going to probably emphasize things that you're doing good and also maybe challenge your perspective sometimes to maybe change some of the ways, your ways of being with children, or maybe even how you think about guiding. It's going to cause you to explore new techniques and maybe ask questions of others, and then to incorporate that new knowledge into your practice. And it's a cycle because it doesn't end. I used to say I used to work with infants for 9 years. I worked with infants, and I used to think in my mind, there's no child's coming through that door that I won't be able to understand. And then someone new would come in, and they would just be something brand new that I'd never seen before. And so it would start the cycle all over again: initial awareness, exploration and inquiry, and then incorporating new knowledge into your practice. It's okay to not be perfect. None of us are perfect. And it's okay that, like, probably, I don't know if anybody ever gets to be perfect. Maybe those self-actualized people that we talked about on the earlier slide. I'm going to read to you a little scenario from page 23 of the ninth edition of your textbook. 4-year-old Jamal struggles to get his arms into the sleeves of his coat, rejecting all offers of assistance with a vehement, "I can do it myself." The rest of the class is almost ready, and even though the teacher, Mr. Moore, is concerned that they will soon be waiting impatiently to head outdoors, he recognizes and wants to respect Jamal's fierce desire for independence. He's also worried because he thinks outdoor playtime is important, and teachers in his large program have worked out a schedule so each group gets a turn to use the playground. If Mr. Moore doesn't adhere to the plan, he will create a domino effect, disrupting his colleagues' plans for the day. Meanwhile, his group's scheduled 45-minute period of playtime is ticking away. So based on this scenario, I want you to think about what would Mr. Moore do if his values were for these each individual item rather than all three together. And if he chose to value most Jamal's independence, what would happen? If he chose to value the outdoor playtime, how might he react and what might happen? And if he chose to value the needs of all the groups in the program, what would he do and what might happen? And then I want you to think about, what would you do in this scenario? And your answer and the way you're thinking about it will reflect your personal values. Your decision could be related to social, educational, or resources. So the social aspect is that thinking about Jamal's need for independence and also perhaps the needs of the children to interact together as a group in outdoor play. The educational aspect could be thinking about their health and the benefits that they would gain from being involved in outdoor play. And the third, in terms of resources could be time. It could be the time of the other groups losing some of their time, or that Mr. Moore's group losing their 45 minutes of playtime. In all of these cases, though, social, educational, or resources, if placed in a similar situation, you must explore lots of information to help you think of alternatives. And it's through this exploration that even if your value was over one of these things rather than the other two, it's in the seeking of further information to find viable solutions and alternatives to a challenging situation. Awkward. It's awkward, and these kinds of things probably happen a lot in your day. This is a bit of a game for you to do. In figure 2.2 of your textbook, they provide 9 different value orientations. And I've chosen 6 of them and given a brief description of what the teacher thinks or what they believe, and you need to match that up with the value listed above. So currently they're not lined up correctly, and that's your challenge to line them up. So I'm going to give you 1 minute to read these and line them up starting now. Five more seconds. And on the next slide will be revealed the correct answers. So let's see if you got them right. Teacher A was valuing academic success quite highly. That's why she wants them prepared for real school and has lots of information about ABCs and the like. Teacher B values socialization. So even though he may have a beautiful lesson planned, if there was a spontaneous group activity where children were engaging with each other in a positive way, he would let that continue a little longer. Teacher C values morality, wants children to develop a deep sense of right and wrong, expects they follow the rules in her class, and often discusses with them how they should behave. Teacher D, interested in values aesthetics, keeps the classroom looking attractive, has a nice harmonious balance of colors and natural materials provided. Teacher E values health, wants the children to have lots of fresh air and sunshine, has nice lighting in the room and a comfortable temperature. Asks them how they slept and if they've eaten, because he's realizing that it has an impact on them. And teacher F values individuality, realizes that each child learns in a different way, and she keeps encouraging them to feel free to try new things in her classroom. And there's nothing wrong with any of these value orientations. The challenge happens when, uh, and there's way more the textbook brings forward now, and I'm sure the list is endless. The challenge is when you work with someone whose values are not really aligned that great with your own, or even if your values don't align with the families of the children in your care, then you're going to have challenges. And so we're going to take a look at some recommendations for how to deal with that. So your authors suggest that there are 3 things that you can do when your values are not in alignment with your coworkers or the families of the children in your care. First of all is to listen. And that means really listen and have conversations and build those relationships. And in so doing, you will do the second point here of being sensitive to cultural differences. Um, really work hard to develop those relationships, and you're going to find out more about both of these things in term 3 when you take the communication course and when you take the course about partnerships with families. And so it's just dipping your toe in the water here to think about this now, but it's all about perspective, and it's all about um, being open to that others don't have the same values as you do and how you can maybe come to compromise. But sometimes compromise might not be an option. That's the third point. And if that's the case, then you need to find very sensitive ways of communicating with families that you can't maybe abide by their wishes. One example could be if a family came to you and said, when little Johnny's misbehaving, just give him a little spank on his bum. That's what we do at home. And of course, you're not going to do that. And so, hopefully, in these circumstances, the policies of your center would support you in your ability to communicate with the families. It wouldn't just be your personal values, but the center's policies that would say that you can only behave in a certain way, and that also that your supervisors and director would support you in these decisions that you would have to make when a compromise is not an option. As a nice end to the information provided for this learning outcome, I would like you to click the link and listen to Monique Grace Smith read her story, You Hold Me Up. The version that she reads in the YouTube video is an English version, but I've also been able to obtain one that has Plains Cree words used as well, which is quite lovely. Monique Grace Smith is a Canadian. She lives in British Columbia, and I'm going to try to incorporate story time to support your learning as you go along for each of the learning outcomes. So enjoy Monique reading You Hold Me Up. So these are your next steps, the 3 things you need to do for the rest of your day. I want you to check the daily guide in the Learn Shell Day 1 folder for more details. It's going to be either a Word document or a PDF document that highlights, again, the textbook pages to read that will help to reinforce this slideshow. And also there's at least 2 other readings identified there. One is from Laura Malaguzzi that describes Image of Child, and he is the founder of Reggio Emilia in Italy, and they were the program that came up with the concept of Image of Child. Another one's called The Capable Child, which is, I think, another thing that will help you think about your perspective in terms of what is your individual image of child. So complete those readings. Number 2 says complete Image of Child Part 1. That's where you're going to get 5% just for writing it down. Tell me a little bit about what your individual image of child is. And number 3, view the film Babies. There's a link to it in the daily guide. And complete Image of Child Part 2. When you go to the assessments module or folder in Learn, you will find the more specific instructions for the Image of Child assignment, and there will be more directions for you there. So complete the readings, complete Image Child Part 1, view the video, and complete Image Child Part 2. I hope you have a great day. In terms of communication, if you should need me, you can come into my personal room in WebEx. You can contact me through the Teams site, and you can fire me an email if you have questions. So don't be afraid, contact me, and I hope you have an awesome day. It's a great movie. You're going to love it. Talk to you later, and see you tomorrow.